My name is Commander Tyson Nicholas. I'm a seconded officer from the Royal Australian Navy, currently serving as the Strategic Military Advisor in United Nations Women. So my motivation to want to work on issues of gender equality and women's empowerment really comes from my own operational experience and my own service in conflict-affected and in fragile environments. In my own career, I've served in the UN mission in South Sudan, I've served in Afghanistan, I've served in Iraq, and I've also served in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief in the Asia Pacific. What I have seen is that conflict and fragility has differential and disproportionate impacts on men, women, boys and girls. And in particular, the impacts on women and girls in terms of conflict and fragility is significant. Part of my motivation to want to serve in this type of area and to work on these issues also relates to my own moral injury. My own ability to be able to deal with the issues that I have been exposed to in conflict-affected and fragile environments, the targeted killing of women and girls on the basis of their gender, targeted sexual violence against women and girls, and of course targeted killing and sexual violence against men and boys in conflict and fragile environments. And so my motivation to want to work on women's empowerment and gender equality as a fundamental aspect of, more broadly, human rights is this desire to want to be able to do good in the world, to be able to want to move the dial towards gender equality and women's empowerment, because realistically, gender equality and women's empowerment is a fundamental input to the achievement of peace and security, to the achievement of human rights for all, and of course to the achievement of development. A more safe, secure and prosperous world in which we live. So one should care about gender equality and women's empowerment, not only because it's a fundamental right of non-discrimination in terms of a fundamental human right, but also because gender equality and women's empowerment, and indeed more gender equal societies, results in a less likelihood for conflict or fragility to exist in the first place. So numerous studies over long periods of time have demonstrated from academia and certainly from our knowledge that when you have inequalities in a society, certainly when you have gendered inequalities, when you have inequalities between men, women, boys and girls, when you have restrictions on access to education, restrictions on access to being able to work in certain areas of employment, and when you have other gender stereotypes that negatively impact upon a person based upon their gender identity, then you have more likelihood to be able to have social unrest and indeed to be able to have conflict. So gender inequality and the lack of empowerment of people is both a driver of armed conflict, it's a driver of fragility, and it's not the recipe for success. So in my perspective, gender equality and women's empowerment is fundamentally important to achieve peace and security, to achieve human rights, and to achieve development. And those are the three key areas of work for the United Nations. Another aspect of this, of course, is to do with the security sector. And so women's empowerment and gender equality and the full, equal and meaningful participation of women within both UN peacekeeping, but more broadly within their own security sector, is also an aspect of operational capability. By having both men and women serving alongside each other, by having equality in terms of their opportunity to serve, their opportunity to advance in the organisation, and their opportunity to reach the most senior levels of the organisation, you bring different perspectives, and that contributes to operational capability. Different perspectives in terms of our understanding of the operating environment, the impacts of conflict and fragility on men, women, boys and girls. Also then in terms of our military planning and then the execution of military operations. So in that respect, gender equality and women's empowerment is not simply an issue of human rights and non-discrimination, although it is absolutely an issue of non-discrimination and human rights. But in addition to that, it's about operational effectiveness and operational capability from a military perspective. So the aim and objective of the Women's Military Peace Operations course is to qualify military experts on mission and staff officers for service within force and sector level headquarters, as the first opportunity for those women who qualify through our course to undertake leadership positions within UN peacekeeping. The idea of the Women's Military Peace Operations course is to provide the pathway for women for service in more senior positions within United Nations peacekeeping, and also to contribute to the uniform gender parity strategy of the United Nations in terms of the full, equal and meaningful participation of women in peacekeeping. I would also highlight that this is not only a fundamental issue of non-discrimination and a human right, this is indeed an issue of operational capability and effectiveness in terms of how military women contribute to our understanding of the operating environment through our intelligence assessments in UN peacekeeping, certainly through our operational planning, and then also through the execution of peacekeeping operations to provide protection to civilians, to prevent and protect against conflict-related sexual violence, to prevent and protect against sexual exploitation and abuse, human trafficking and modern slavery, and grave violations against children in armed conflict. In terms of what we can do from a United Nations perspective to address issues of discrimination against women for service in their security sector and for service within United Nations peacekeeping, one of the first fundamental things to do is to look at structural change in terms of normative change, to change the conversation and the dialogue. So in that respect here, what we're looking at is framing women's participation, full, equal and meaningful participation as an issue of non-discrimination, but also as an operational effectiveness and capability perspective. One of the other issues that we can do from that perspective is to look at what are both the structural barriers and also the cultural barriers that prevent women from wanting to serve within their own member state armed forces and indeed in UN peacekeeping. So we can look at what affects recruitment, what affects retention, what affects promotion and advancement, and ultimately then look at removing those structural barriers, particularly when they're unnecessary and don't have a direct link to actually delivering an operational capability, when they are just structural barriers that are in place because the structure was set up to suit the needs of men and not the needs of women. We can also look at then what sort of equipment are we providing military women? Are we giving them the right protective equipment? Are we structuring our force so that we give considerations to the different needs of men and women in terms of the use of military equipment? And then finally as well, we can look at how do we achieve cultural change. Cultural change is fundamentally important, particularly within a military structure where culture is king, where culture forms part of the esprit de corps and the fighting prowess of a military, or indeed of the prowess of a military to undertake peacekeeping operations. And it really requires men to stand up in those military cultures and to say that women's empowerment and gender equality and the full, equal and meaningful participation of women in the security sector and in UN peacekeeping is important. And the reason why I say that is because in most member states and indeed in UN peacekeeping, the security sectors are dominated by men. And so it takes those men to stand up, to have the moral courage to be able to say that this is an important issue and indeed to be able to, at times, direct that cultural change. Cultural change comes from the bottom up, but it also comes from the top down in a military perspective. And so all those things in and of themselves are required to achieve that cultural change. From my perspective, the most rewarding aspect of my work as the Strategic Military Advisor in United Nations Women is the ability to be able to affect positive change. To be able to affect positive change, as I mentioned earlier, to move the dial or the needle, to be able to look at working on issues of the full, equal and meaningful participation of women in peacekeeping. And certainly a highlight of my time so far in UN Women has been the Women's Military Peace Operations course here in Seoul, Korea. But over and above that, I think that the ability to be able to do good is what really drives me and is indeed probably the thing I'm most proud of. Just try to do good every day, and it's really simple, but like my grandmother used to tell me, just treat people the way you want to be treated.